So today we are pleased to have Mark Greer, candidate for Akron Mayor, with us today to talk about some of his views and ideas as he is going down the path of campaigning for the top job in the city. Mr. Greer, welcome. We appreciate having you here today. I'm going to do a quick introduction here based on your bio and your background and things like that, but then have you make just a few opening remarks, welcoming comments to folks, and also tell us a little bit about why you, why now. But Mark is a native Akronite. He worked over the last 4 years as part of the administration in the city of Akron. He's most recently been the Small Business Program Manager and Administrator of the Great Streets Initiative, which focuses on 13 neighborhood business districts to drive business development and retention, enhanced aesthetics, urban design and public space, vibrant and inclusive placemaking, improved public safety and transportation conditions, and greater community engagement. The program itself was responsible for awarding over $3 million in facade improvement grants, providing ongoing support to our local CBCs, merchants associations, and community organizations. He's been an advocate for entrepreneurs in the role, assisting business owners in growing and scaling their companies, and securing vacant storefronts throughout the Great Streets, attaining resources and capital, and providing essential training and support. Before his work with the city, he was a program coordinator at Leadership Akron, where his programs include Diversity on Board, Edge Young Professionals, the Green Community Learning Initiative, and Junior Leadership Akron. He also has prior experience teaching on the faculties of Malone University, the University of Mount Union, Kent State University, and the Settlement Music School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania sort of recent transplant back here with us today. And so Mark graduated from Bowling Green State University with a Bachelor's of Music, magna cum laude in music performance, and Kent State University with a Master's of Music in piano. He also serves as assistant pastor at the Family Church, a non-denominational ministry in Akron's University Park neighborhood. Again, Mark, welcome to the GAC. Thanks for being here today. So why you, why now for the city of Akron?
Well, first of all, thank you, Steve, for having me here. It's really great being here with the members of the chamber. Why me, why now? I think for me, that answer is why not now for Akron?
Right.
I think that I've spent my life working in community development, and during my work at the city of Akron, I think my first 3 days on the job I spent behind a desk. And I realized, I said, you know what, I'm never going to be able to do this work effectively if I just stay here. I had to be near where the issues actually were, because I strongly believe that we don't know what we're not near. And so as I've been working in the communities on the ground, I found that many times what we at the city level want to do and implement is not connected to the realities of where people actually live and work.
Yep.
And so for me, it's time for real change to happen here in Akron. It's time for that change to affect all of our neighborhoods and all of our communities equally, including those that have been marginalized and disinvested for many times for decades. So I'm looking to bring that real impactful change to all of Akron.
So talk about then why you specifically, right? What is it? I mean, you've got an interesting background. I've been able to work with you over the past on some of our Elevate Greater Akron work. I know you have a great passion for our neighborhoods and the businesses in the community. What do you think you bring individually as a candidate for mayor?
I think one, I've spent the time on the ground where the realities are. I think when we are removed from where our people live and the issues that they face on a daily basis, that's when we see policy begin to disconnect from the people that we have endeavored to serve. And I think that I am well positioned in this role in the fact that I've actually worked on the ground with people. I go door to door speaking with business owners. I've helped them at the core level of seeing how they function and what are the real challenges and the opportunities that will really unlock doors here in Akron for all of our neighborhoods, for all of our communities. But also, Steve, I'm a fighter. I think that we could even talk about this in our experiences over the past several years, I'm someone who swims upstream.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that we need, as our next mayor, someone who is willing to put themselves on the line and fight for our most marginalized neighborhoods and communities, and that's what I've done. I've literally put myself on the line. I think if anyone saw the front page of the paper several weeks ago, and you know, in my advocating
Mm-hmm.
for the equitable solutions to those that were involved in the inner belt.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about the history of urban renewal and the inner belt and the grave effects that it had on particularly our Black communities in neighborhoods like West Hill, Oak Park, Opportunity Parkway, Grant Washington, Lane Wooster. And so I put myself on the line there, and I think Akron needs a leader who's willing to not only talk the talk, but walk that walk, and that's what I've done.
So before we jump into sort of some of your ideas for downtown and development and neighborhoods and things like that, can you just, because I'm not sure everybody is really familiar with what the Great Streets program is, but I think it's such a core part of the experience that you're talking about
Right.
and the work that you've done. Can you just explain a little bit what Great Streets is for the city?
So Great Streets is an initiative really aimed at rebuilding and revitalizing our neighborhood business corridors.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, with all of the investment that we've seen downtown, it's equally important to invest in the neighborhoods where people live, work, and play, because we know the economic effects when you live in a neighborhood where you can't find or purchase the necessities you need for daily living. Well, we know what happens. We have to leave those
Mm-hmm.
areas. And so if you're someone like me who grew up off of Copley Road, and 35 years ago Copley Road was very different than what it is now. But when people in that neighborhood have to leave in order to find fresh produce,
Mm-hmm.
our organic produce, our appliances, the effects that it has on the communities is tangibly felt. And so with Great Streets, we wanted to focus on revitalizing these areas, not just by focusing on business development and also retention, but really improving the overall urban appeal and the aesthetic feel of these corridors. We did a lot with you know, beautifying streetscapes. Mm-hmm. We implemented planters in many of these areas that hadn't seen much tender, loving care for a long time. And we rebuilt and repurposed, for example, vacant lots, turning them into neighborhood parks. Mm-hmm. We focus a lot on really building community where people are, but also building community where it had been lost. Not because the people in those communities didn't care, but they had been devalued.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk then about, as mayor, what are some of the priorities around economic development that you would embrace? You've been a part of the work that we've done with LDA Greater Akron over the last few years. You've had a couple of different areas of focus there. But talk about, you know, as mayor, you get the chance to call the shots and sort of set the agenda for that work. So what does that look like for you in terms of economic development?
Well, I think it's a huge opportunity here in Akron. I think that when we look at the Elevate Akron plan, part of the core findings showed that the opportunity and the wealth gap between blacks in Akron, which we know are 30% of our population, and whites was a significant gap, and it has not improved. Look, COVID has also had a huge negative impact there as well. But what my top priorities are going to focus around is when we talk about elevating Akron, we have to always ask ourselves, for whom? And I think that what the plan highlighted for us is that we have challenges, but we have amazing opportunities to move the needle in building wealth in our communities, especially our marginalized and communities of color. And so one of my focuses, Steve, is going to be in building wealth within the communities that have been the most adversely impacted. Because I think it's so important, and I'll give you an example here. It's so important that we not just put resources in our marginalized communities, but that we enable those communities to build wealth. I was looking at, for example, the renovation of the Ed Davis Community Center, which is going to be taking place in Ward 3. Well, during my time at the city, when that contract came through, we only received one bid. And that is a predominantly black and minority neighborhood. The bid did not come from a minority contractor. I know I personally put forth several minority contractors to be reached out to, but what happened is, because of time constraints and also the tediousness of the application process, we didn't have a minority contractor doing the work in a minority community. And so what happens is, yes, we have a new resource in one of the areas that the Elevate Akron plan, showed us needs more investment, but we're not building wealth within that community because we're not hiring a minority contractor that lives and works in that area. So I think that building wealth in the community is of the utmost importance and will be my top priority, because when we build wealth in a community, then we can build our own resources. And we won't have to wait for a once-in-a-generation $145 million ARPA allotment, which we will never see again, right? So it's very important that we are intentional in not just implementing a resource or two in a neighborhood, in a community, but empowering that neighborhood to build wealth within itself. And so then they can build their own resources.
How much of that, Mark, do you think is the ability to communicate and connect with people in the community about the opportunities that exist, or sort of the need to create incentives or ways in which businesses that are in those communities have more technical assistance and support? What's the balance of things that you think help build wealth in these communities?
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting question. I think the need for technical assistance and wraparound support is there, but honestly, when you have an opportunity out there, and if it's not marketed, and if it's not widely known, and if it's not easily accessible, then you already marginalize a sector of the business community that you want to involve. Okay. And so I think that streamlining these processes at the city level is really important. Marketing these opportunities in a very prominent way is hugely important, and then making the process accessible to everyone. Got it. We have to also realize that a lot of our minority companies don't have the same staff capacity. And so when the process to apply for an RFP is geared towards a company that has a large number of employees, as opposed to one that could be just as effective but has less employees, then we're creating and perpetuating the same inequitable outcomes that we're looking to eradicate.
So, and in some ways, because you've been involved with so many things, this may be a little unfair to ask you to go deeper on a couple of these things, but I do want to get a sense of, we've been working hard on thinking about not only the community and the neighborhoods and our businesses, but also our downtown.
Right.
What's your vision for downtown? Where will you focus time and attention there?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, I actually live downtown, and I think one of the things that we have to focus on in downtown is the fact that I love history, and I love looking at these old photos from,
Yeah.
downtown in the 40s, the 50s, 60s, and so on. And we see that a huge component of the traffic downtown was retail oriented, right? And I think the one of the core issues and challenges with downtown now is that it is primarily an event space. And so when events are happening, people are there, and it's got a great feel. But if an event is not happening, as someone who lives downtown, there have been times I could come out of my building and walk down Main Street, and I can feel like I'm on the set of The Last Man on Earth. And so we don't
You're the only
want
guy
that
there, huh?
feel, right?
Yeah, right.
And I told someone, I said, people move downtown not because they want a quiet space. And right now, it's just too quiet.
Got it.
So I think really focusing on bringing a thriving retail ecosystem to downtown is of the utmost importance. I think we have a start there. We've seen businesses like Unknown come. Dashika Street has a great business there on Main Street. We are building that, but I want to really amp that up. I said, look, we have the amazing resource of having 20,000 University of Akron students there, and I think it's important that we invest in it and attract the businesses that core group of students wants. And so I would love to see, for example, an Apple store here in downtown Akron. I think we need to put things in downtown where you can't find anywhere else, and that includes Fairlawn, Montrose, whether it's a retail clothing store like a Zara or an H&M or an Urban Outfitters. I mean, we don't need people driving out to Beechwood or somewhere in Cleveland, but let's build a thriving retail corridor experience right there in downtown Akron.
So, one of the things that we've talked a lot about is workforce, right?
Definitely.
And the need to sort of cultivate both attraction of talent to our community. So some of the things you just talked about maybe help with that, but also to sort of engage the talent that we have here in the community. We think about our Akron Public Schools with 20,000 students. They are sort of the #1 place to sort of drive, youth into sort of opportunities in our region. Tell me about your thoughts about the role of Akron's mayor with the public schools. I know it's not necessarily directly in the domain, but obviously you've got the bully pulpit as mayor and the ability to sort of set priorities. Talk about what you're seeing there right now, what you'd like to see happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Steve. I think that as mayor, we have the opportunity to really influence and affect policy and also the overall direction at our public schools. I think we need to do a lot more in preparing our students with 21st century skills, and also for the industries where, frankly, the need and the opportunities are so vast and prominent. I talk with contractors all the time who are saying, you know what, we really need skilled trades, like electricians, like plumbers, like my dad went to Barberton High School, and he went to vocational school at what was then Howard, right? And he graduated and went directly into the machine shop at Firestone. That was a time where you could literally come from nothing, in a sense, but enter into a field and a job where you could make a decent middle-class living. I think that there are fields like that where students can come out of high school and literally go into a career with a starting salary in the 60s. Well, I graduated from college, I went to grad school, and my starting career was not in the 60s.
Right.
It was barely in the 30s.
Yep.
So I mean, we have to, again, realize, I think that when I was in school, the impetus was always go to college. And I think while college is great, and it's great for some, it's not great or necessarily better for all. And I think also there are really viable and exciting career options that we need to make sure that we are preparing our students for those, because if not, we're going to have to keep outsourcing these really good job and career opportunities when we have the homegrown talent that is available to take advantage of them.
So one of the things that there's been a lot of activity and discussion about recently is what we can be doing for kids in our community on their out of school time. I saw an interesting statistic that said that where youth offenders are involved, a lot of that happens between 3 in the afternoon and 6 or 7 at night, right? Between that bridge time between school and whatever happens at night in their homes. And I also saw another stat that said 10 years ago, I think it was, we had 1,000+ students employed through youth employment opportunities through the city and I think through the county as well. And now we're down to about 100 kids who are in that program. Talk about that connection of sort of where you want to take us in that space for youth in our community.
Yeah, I think this is a hugely important aspect. I think that, look, we always know, I remember growing up, and I was raised by very old school parents, Steve, but the expression was always, if you were doing something you weren't supposed to, it was, well, you have too much time on your hands, right? And I think that now especially, I think that we have to be intentional at creating opportunities to engage our students and our youth. I think that frankly, we don't have enough outlets for our young people here either. I mean, I remember growing up when we had skating rinks. We had there were socials, dances. I'm not talking about just in school. And I was not a popular person, so it's not like I was always invited to those outlets. But I'm just saying we had outlets. Okay. There were multiple things you could do. There were also more job opportunities as well. So we have to lean in creating a viable and a vibrant pipeline of employment opportunities for youth. I think that there are also, I think, opportunities to partner with students in our high schools, with younger students, whether it's elementary schools, whether it's middle schools, and creating tutoring, employment opportunities, youth mentorship. I think that there are so many opportunities that we can lean in there, but it's important to also realize we as a city, we have to also create viable and safe places of engagement, of social activity. I think that for kids now growing up in the social media technology generation, for those of us who didn't grow up in that era, I think that we've often said, well, it's not the same now because everyone has a device in their hand, or everyone has earbuds in their ears. I still remember growing up as a kid and playing with like Tinker toys, believe it or not. But I mean, now I have nieces and nephews who are young as 2 and 3 who they have iPads in their hands. And I think that it's created a disconnect, but we can't forget that creating spaces for young people to engage with each other is of the utmost importance, and we can't let those things just pass away.
Let me just pause for a moment and ask if folks who are in attendance today have questions that they want to pose. Throw your question out there and I can repeat it for our taping. Ebony?
Hi, Mark. Ebony Porter with the Chamber. Can you share with us what will the first
So the question is, what was the first 90 days in office look like for you?
So the first 90 days, first of all, we're going to convene the leaders not only in our city and our nonprofit and corporate community, but we are going to convene what I view as a community summit. I think that every neighborhood in Akron has to be represented. And when I talk about that, the reason why I think this is so important is because if you asked even a majority of Akronites, I mean, people who were born here, who were raised here, and I know this because in my work as the Great Streets Administrator, I would often ask, how many neighborhoods are in Akron? And then I would have people start, answering. And, you'd hear things like Wallhaven, Highland Square, maybe you'd hear something like Maple Valley, North Hill, Firestone Park, but then it would get really quiet. And I'm talking about people who lived here in Akron. And so I think what we are going to do is create and convene a community summit where leaders from all of our neighborhoods and communities come, and we are going to actually put on the table what are the main issues and challenges that you've been facing that haven't been addressed, that haven't been talked about. We're going to make sure that the communities that have been forgotten and overlooked are going to be brought to the forefront. I think this is so important when we talk about equity. The first 90 days of my administration are going to be focused on not equity in word, but equity in deed. I think the issue is that we've talked about these things, but we haven't done the necessary work to address them. One of the other core priorities in our first 90 days at the City of Akron will be to update our HR policies and practices. I think one of the areas that I'm talking about here is there's a reason why we still don't see the diversity and the inclusion not only at the city level, but in a lot of our corporations and nonprofits. I'll give you this example. So if you look at the upper management levels of positions at the city, you'll see requirements for having a degree in business or economics or accounting or finance, for example. And if you don't have one of those educational requirements, even if you had the work experience, then you would not be eligible to interview for one of those jobs. I know that from experience. Yes, I have a graduate degree, but yeah, it's a graduate degree in music, which always is an amazing conversation starter, believe me. But when I talk about that, the reason why it's so important to address issues like these is because we know, and I know this being a former teacher myself, that historically students of color were not encouraged to major in fields like business, or economics, or finance, but they were more often encouraged to major in fields like social work, communications, criminal justice. It's nothing against those fields, but when the upper level management positions that we're seeking to diversify require a narrow range of fields and educational backgrounds, then you're going to only see the same things happen. So I believe at the city, we are going to lead the way to not only reforming our HR practices at the city level, but we talk about the mayor's bully pulpit. I'm going to be advocating and encouraging our corporate and nonprofit partners to do the same. Because if we look at the boardrooms, right, of our nonprofits and our corporations, we see that we still have a long way to go. When I worked at Leadership Akron, one of my programs was diversity on board, which is about really building a pipeline of minority candidates to serve on public and nonprofit boards. Well, looking at that program over the past several years, and then looking at the board makeup now of many of our organizations, we see the needle hasn't moved enough. Mm-hmm. So convening that community summit, reforming the HR practices. Another thing that was going to be huge in the first 90 days is we have to build and restore trust with our public safety, for our law enforcement and our community. Mm-hmm. I think that we cannot ignore the biggest and most impactful issue that we've faced here in Akron in decades has been with the killing of Jayland Walker. And we know that we're coming up on the grand jury that's going to be happening here in this next month in April. And we have to restore trust between our communities and our public servants in law enforcement. We have to ensure that justice and transparency happens, because if Akronites do not feel safe, then we've lost our city. Mm-hmm. And I strongly believe that every neighborhood in Akron, regardless of where you live, you have that right to safety, and the call for justice does not preclude that. Mm-hmm. And the word justice is not a bad word. I think that we have to, really come together as a city around that. And I think that oftentimes it's been framed as, well, this is an issue for the Black community. No, it's an issue for the Akron community. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that we move our city forward as long as it's still fractionized. We have to bring Akron together as one family in order to see us advance and progress in every area.
Other questions? Mark.
I'm Mark with Prospect Down.
Yes.
I want to follow up on that and ask you, can you be more specific on the steps you would take as mayor to balance the need for justice and police reform with public safety and the need for law enforcement to provide for a safe environment for the business community and for the citizens?
Yes.
So the question is sort of, can you balance the need for public safety with the need for reform with the needs of the community and its citizens?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it is. I don't think it's actually that hard to balance. When we look at our public safety officials, they're sworn to protect and defend all of us. Mm-hmm. But what happens is that when there is a level of distrust, those barriers to communication and collaboration will actually perpetuate a greater lack of safety in those neighborhoods and areas that are most directly impacted. I think so. For me, one thing I want to focus on, Mark, is making sure that we start to actually have community policing, not as an option, but as a practice. One thing that I did during my time as the Great Streets Administrator at the city is that we piloted a neighborhood ambassador program on Copley Road. All of you probably know about the downtown Akron Partnership and the downtown ambassadors that do really such an outstanding job in our downtown area, making it not only clean, but having that feeling of safety and a welcoming environment. I want to bring a citywide neighborhood ambassador program into play, where we hire people who live in these communities to actually patrol where they live and work. And I think that when we look at the call for justice, I think when justice happens, trust happens. Oftentimes, we want the trust, we want the peace, we want the calm, but without the justice. It's kind of like, putting a bandage around a wound that hasn't been cleaned and expecting it to heal. So I think when we lean into justice, we're not only going to build the trust, but then we also, on the adverse end, we lean into empowering our communities to police themselves. And look, I talked about this earlier, but I grew up on the west side. I grew up off of Copley Road. We were in a forum. We've had a number of them, Steve, but we were in a forum. I forget which one.
Yeah.
And
Probably a forum every couple of days, right?
yeah, it's like I was talking about this though, and I said, the fact that I know, and you could speak to all of our law enforcement, they know where the drug houses are in these marginalized neighborhoods. I could take you down certain neighborhoods in Akron and tell you, where the issues are, because I have people who live there who reach out to me. Many of them, don't want to get involved themselves. But here's my point. If we would not allow these things to persist in an affluent area, then why should we allow them to continually persist in all of these other neighborhoods, right? Every person, regardless of where they live, they deserve the right to safety in their homes. And I don't want to see neighborhoods where grandmothers have to hit the decks in their houses, where we have children who are young as 4 years old who are getting, shot. And so I think we can and will lean in to make impactful change here. Look, I'm not for defunding police. We actually need more police on the ground, visible, walking the blocks. I'm not a proponent of having substations in neighborhoods because, as someone who worked with APD at the city, they actually told us, well, they don't really prefer having those because they can't really man them, and they typically just kind of stay in there and use them as pit stops and so on. I want to see our police on the street building relationships. Right. Because I think the issue that we've seen here in Akron is that when law enforcement doesn't know the communities and the people who live there, where they serve, that's when we see a perpetuation of mistrust. I remember coming up, it's like I knew cops in our areas who, they knew me by name, or they knew my mom, who's a pastor, which, having a parent who's a pastor, you could never get away with anything.
Say, everybody tells on you, right?
But I just mean, having those relationships are important.
Yep.
And the more that we remain nameless to each other, the worse these issues will be.
Sure. Other questions folks have? So talk a little bit about the way in which City Hall works with businesses, with developers, with folks. Are there specific ideas you have about making it easier to work with the city to accelerate activity and progress?
Definitely. We need to really streamline and modernize that process. I think when we talk about transparency and how city government works, look, I know this firsthand, and I'm sure you've experienced so much of this, is that I would have so many people reach out to me, and I can't count how many small business owners in this area have my personal cell phone number, and they still call me now, even though I'm not at the city. But they would call me and ask about information that much of it at times was available if you looked on our website, even though our city website has some issues. But I would just say they would always tell me, well, it's easier for me to just reach out to you because I don't have to go through this many hoops. I don't have to talk to several people. I can just get that one answer. And I think we have to design our city government to address the real needs and realities of not only our community, but particularly our small business community, which every small business owner, every entrepreneur knows the last thing you have time for is to go on a wild goose chase. You need the answer quickly, and you need it now. And a lot of times you need it outside of normal business hours, right? And so we have to really design everything we do with them in mind. I think working with them directly over the past several years has uniquely qualified me to really reform how we've done things for a long time. But now we've got to modernize it. We have to move it forward, and so we as the city can start operating at the same speed as where our citizens actually live and work. We have to move with them. We can't be that weight that they're trying to drag along.
As you have been part of the administration over the last few years, we have been dealing with these, as you said, one-time infusion of funds,
Right.
for ARPA. And I think from everything I've read that by the time the new person takes office, those funds will have been committed to certain kinds of things for our community. Are there places, if we had the opportunity to get another chunk of dollars for some reason, or draw more money down from the state, is there a particular place you'd want to focus those funds? Do you have ideas around the systemic things that you might invest in?
Yes, I think small business support is certainly one of them. And when I look at the ARPA allotment, for example, we had $1 million of the 145 that went in direct payments to our small businesses, and that was less than the 1.3 million that we paid our consultants to actually, tell us how to spend those funds. And so the message that we sent is that, okay, we're actually prioritizing an outside company over the lifeblood of our economy here in Akron. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have to significantly increase our investment in our small business community, and that includes our sole proprietors as well. Because when we look at sole proprietorships, that not only includes the majority of our minority-owned businesses, but also our creative economy. When you look at artists, musicians, those craftsmen, we just had a forum yesterday about arts and culture. And when we look at our creative economy, it's a segment that has been often overlooked and not seen as a priority for direct investment. And I think, me, with my background as working in the arts, mm-hmm. I worked in the arts for a number of years, and when you work in the arts, you learn that you have to do multiple things, because most of those options do not help you make a great living. So I think that we have to, again, recognize and acknowledge the real challenges that our small business community has faced, especially with COVID. I think we can't lose sight of the fact that COVID has forever changed the landscape of how small businesses operate, of how our workforce looks like, and how even our larger companies will operate in the future. And so we have to strongly and tangibly support the lifeblood of our economy, that's what my administration will certainly focus upon.
All right, that's an opportunity for any additional questions folks have, please.
Excuse me, I'm Allison Smith from Chicago. We've talked a lot about wealth building, and we know one of the key components of wealth building for a community, but also individuals, is home ownership. I know you're really interested in non-traditional paths to home ownership. Can you talk a little bit more about that plan?
Yes.
So the question was asking you to talk a little bit more about non-traditional paths to home ownership, because home ownership is a key part of wealth building.
Really glad that you asked that question. I think this is one of the core areas for me of why I'm running, and the change, the impactful change that needs to happen. Look, we know that half of Akron is renting, and what that tells us is that we need more diverse housing options, not less. And so part of my platform will focus on finally updating and changing our antiquated zoning laws and regulations that we know have existed for decades and have also been systemically discriminatory to large portions of our community. I think that what we have to realize is that it's not just that we need more affordable housing. That's obvious, but we have to do what's necessary to create more affordable housing. And by more, I mean more types of housing that everyone can afford. So when we look at Akron, and the majority of it is zoned R1 single family. Now, everyone cannot afford a single family home. Everyone doesn't want a single family home. And that's not just young people like me who do not like to mow a lawn or shovel snow, but that could be a retiree who's looking to downsize. It could be a widow like my mom who doesn't have the capacity anymore to take care of a larger house and a larger lot. And so I want to move tangibly into more mixed use zoning. And when we talk about that, that doesn't mean that we're going to see a high rise next to a single family home, but we have such a huge missing middle housing market that we are not addressing, from mid-rise buildings to multiplexes to row homes to townhomes to accessory dwelling units to tiny homes, modular homes. We can create opportunities for everyone who wants to own a home to own the home that works for them. And I think when we actually do that, we're going to see real change, and we will create real pathways to home ownership. But we can't do it by simply keeping everything the same in terms of our zoning policies and regulations that have actually created a very narrow path to home ownership. And that narrow path is actually narrowing even more. So we have to open it up. We have to realize that we can do tangible things in policy where everyone in Akron who wants to own a home, they can actually afford it. We just have to see beyond the R1 single family zoning lens that we have used for decades.
I asked this question of another candidate, so to be fair,
Yes.
I'm going to ask it of you. I'm an outsider. I come from Detroit. I just moved here about a month ago. And when searching for housing, what I was finding, because I'm this sort of researcher, is that you have a major problem with people buying up affordable properties and then holding them as rentals and charging $1,300 to $1,500 a month for them. The properties that are somewhere around $60,000 for a sale price, 60 to 80, are going for $1,300 to $1,400 a month. How do you plan to address that issue? Because that's really causing a problem for affordable home ownership.
So the question is around affordable home ownership and this idea that we have outside entities or companies buying up properties and making them available at prices that might be above market for housing. So how do you handle that and deal with that?
Yeah, I think that is a real and viable point and issue here. I think that we have to have caps on how much land and properties that outside entities can purchase, and like you said, hold on to. I think, look, let's just be totally transparent with this. Not saying all, but many times when out-of-state owners, hold these properties, the responsibility and the accountability is not the same as local landowners. And so I strongly believe that there have to be caps on these regards, because we can't have housing providers with no accountability to those who are in need of housing. When that happens, we see problems like this that will continue to perpetuate. And I think that also we can do a lot more with working hand in hand with our Summit County Land Bank as well. I think there are opportunities, in my work with the Great Streets Initiative. I worked closely with colleagues at the Land Bank, but we talk about streamlining and making information more readily available. Well, I know that you can look on the Land Bank website, for example, and you may not see all of the opportunities for housing, for lots. And look, I know capacity is a real thing. We all know that workforce challenges are a huge thing. But I want to, as mayor, work really closely with the Summit County Land Bank and making sure that local landowners and those who want to invest in properties right here at home have an open pipeline and a first shot at that table to make significant investments here at home. And so we can also make sure that we have landowners who are not only accountable to their tenants, but landowners who have a personal stake and investment in seeing Akron thrive for all of us.
Thank you. Well, Mark Greer, candidate for Akron Mayor, thank you so much for
Thanks for having me,
your
Steve.
time today. We appreciate the work it takes to run.
Yes.
You guys have been out and about talking to lots of folks about your ideas, and we wish you luck in a few weeks.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you to all of the members of the chamber.